The banquet hall carried the scent of scorched coffee, furniture wax, and rain still clinging to wool jackets. Ryan Foster stood at the head of the engagement table, a champagne flute in one hand and his other finger aimed straight at me. 3 sentences into his toast, everyone in that room realized his celebration had turned into an ambush. "Just tell them what you really do, Samantha," he said. "No dodging, no hiding behind clearance levels. Explain why 2 admirals keep referring to a desk officer as Sentinel." Beside me, my husband David went rigid. Ryan's fiancée dropped her gaze. Even the server near the back paused mid-pour. My fingers rested on a sealed navy envelope in my lap, its gold and blue emblem pressed so firmly into the paper that I could feel the raised edges through my glove. Ryan had spent 6 weeks orchestrating this exact moment, gathering former commanding officers, senior staff, family friends, and enough witnesses to guarantee my embarrassment would be unforgettable. He assumed the envelope was nothing but a prop. He assumed my quiet meant I had no defense. I met his eyes and gave him the only line I planned to offer. "You should have waited for the Admiral to arrive." A chair screeched near the doorway. Rear Admiral Marcus Vale had entered. His gaze moved from me to the envelope to Ryan looming over the table with his glass raised like a gavel. The Admiral handed his cap to an aide and crossed the room directly toward us. Ryan's grin held, but his knuckles whitened around the stem of his glass. The Admiral came to a stop beside me. "Commander Samantha Foster," he said. "Stand up, Sentinel." The flute slid from Ryan's fingers and hit the tablecloth without shattering, though Ryan had no idea what he'd just set into motion. I was raised in Cedar Hollow, Virginia, the kind of small town where neighbors could name your family just from the sound of your truck engine turning onto Main Street. Our home sat behind the hardware store, facing a church whose bell always rang 6 minutes behind schedule on Sundays. Summers smelled of peaches and floor polish. Winters brought pipes that knocked inside the walls like something wanting to be let in. My mother, Evelyn Hale, understood quiet people because she was one herself. My father did not. He valued accomplishments he could hang on a wall. My older brother's baseball trophies filled the living room shelves. His pictures lined the hallway. First home run, first hunting trip, first scholarship banquet. When I placed first in the regional math competition at 13, my certificate stayed folded inside the envelope it arrived in because my father saw no reason to display school paperwork. My mother found a slim frame at a secondhand shop, painted it navy, and hung my certificate inside my closet out of my father's sight. She shielded my achievements from anyone who needed them diminished. That was simply who she was. Small, steady gestures. A pressed uniform shirt ready before sunrise, a thermos filled for my early diner shifts. A note slipped under my pillow before my Naval Academy interview. "You don't need anyone's permission to become who you already are." My father laughed when the acceptance packet arrived. "Annapolis?" he said, ripping open a sugar packet over his coffee. "Samantha, that place wants leaders. You barely talk at the dinner table." My brother snickered into his cereal. My mother said nothing, only pressed 2 fingers to my wrist under the table until my hands stopped trembling. The deepest wound came 2 months later at my high school honors night when I was named a statewide leadership scholar. My father swore he'd be there. I saved him the aisle seat because he hated stepping over people's legs. The auditorium smelled of dust, hot stage lighting, and carnations wrapped in cellophane. His seat stayed empty the entire evening. When I got home, I found him in front of a baseball game with my brother. He never looked away from the screen. "Something came up," was all he offered. Nothing had. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway holding my program, my name circled in blue ink. That night I stopped waiting for him to notice me. Not out of hatred, not out of any wish for revenge, but because I finally accepted that some doors stay shut no matter how gently you knock. At 18, I left Cedar Hollow with a single suitcase, $200, and my mother's note tucked in my wallet. The Navy never asked whether I'd been anyone's favorite. It only asked whether I could think clearly while exhausted, whether I could pick out what mattered inside the noise, whether I could stay level when everyone else confused panic with progress. I trained myself into someone who could. Years afterward, in the middle of the Arabian Sea, a warning light flared red inside a compartment barely wider than a hallway. The air tasted of hot metal and burning wiring. We had 12 minutes before a surveillance vessel carrying 4 American operators would drift into hostile waters. 3 voices shouted over each other. I tuned out every one of them and focused on the numbers. A fuel transfer had been keyed in correctly but executed out of sequence. I halted the automated response, redirected the backup system, and issued a single order to the flight crew. Hold heading, 90 seconds. We pulled the platform back with 18 seconds to spare before the mission would have crossed a line no one could ever publicly acknowledge. There was no ceremony, no applause. A senior chief named Walt Reyes handed me a cup of coffee that tasted like engine fuel and told me, "You see the whole board before the rest of us even know a game's being played." That was the night the Callsign Sentinel was born. It trailed me into windowless rooms, onto ships that never appeared in anyone's holiday letters, through missions that existed only as redacted lines in files most officers would never be cleared to read. On a winter deployment, I helped guide a medical team out from behind a collapsed mountain pass. Snow hammered the aircraft like thrown gravel. One pilot wanted to turn the mission around. I didn't order him forward. I gave him updated wind readings, fuel math, and the single corridor still open for landing. He studied the map for 3 seconds. "Sentinel says it'll hold," he told his crew. "It holds." 11 people made it home. I missed my mother's last birthday during that same deployment, calling her from a secure room at 3:10 in the morning, listening to her breathe between sentences. "You sound worn out," she said. "I'm okay." I know. She passed away 4 months later while I was crossing the Atlantic under orders I couldn't speak about. By the time I reached Cedar Hollow, the flowers at her grave had already gone brown at the edges. My father handed me a locked document box she'd left for me. "She said you'd know when to open it," he mumbled. I didn't open it right away. Grief makes people careless, and my mother taught me never to open something important simply because I was hurting. I carried that box through 3 duty stations and 1 marriage. Everything I'd trained through, everything I'd survived, had all been leading toward a room I hadn't yet walked into. I met David Foster at a charity race in Norfolk. He wasn't military. He designed bridge structures, brewed terrible coffee, and never treated my silences as an opening to pry. He accepted that parts of my work would always stay locked away from him, and he never asked me to trade honesty for honor. His older brother, Ryan, was nothing like him. A Navy lieutenant in surface warfare, driven, capable, and endlessly starved for attention. His service record was solid, but his insecurity was draining. At family dinners, he retold routine drills like turning points in history. His father, Charles, egged him on, pouring bourbon and lobbing questions designed to keep Ryan talking. His mother beamed with pride. David squeezed my hand under the table every time his brother's attention swung toward me, which it always did. "You're Navy too, right?" Ryan asked at one such dinner. "Logistics? Scheduling?" "A bit of both," I said. He leaned back, satisfied. "So you keep the real operators stocked up." I reached for the potatoes. Charles chuckled. Ryan's mother looked briefly uneasy but stayed silent. Near the head of the table sat Walt Reyes, retired now, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, someone I hadn't seen in 9 years. He hadn't recognized me at first, dressed as I was in jeans and a plain sweater. Time changes people. Ryan kept going. "Not that office work isn't valuable. Someone's got to push the paperwork. But you should get out on a real ship sometime. See what the Navy's actually about." Walt set his fork down slowly, studying my face, my posture, the thin scar along my left hand. "What was your call sign?" he asked. David's grip on my hand tightened. I answered because Walt had earned whatever truth he was cleared to hear. "Sentinel." His fork clicked softly against the plate. Walt didn't salute or make an announcement. He simply straightened in his seat. "I've heard stories," he said. Ryan laughed too fast. "About a logistics officer?" Walt looked at him. "No." That one word changed the whole meal. The next morning, Walt called me. We spoke carefully, tracing the narrow line between memory and what could actually be said. Before hanging up, he told me, "You saved men who never even learned your name. Don't let a loud room convince you to doubt a quiet life." That line stayed with me. Ryan couldn't accept what had happened at that table, and within days he began reshaping the story. Walt was old. The call sign was probably some training exercise. I must have enjoyed the mystique. A month later, he invited us to the Navy Heritage Gala, introducing me to junior officers as his sister-in-law who handles paperwork. I let it go. The ballroom glittered with brass and crystal light as a string quartet played beneath the murmur of career small talk. Admiral Vale arrived near 9, bypassing the base commander's outstretched hand to cross the floor and take mine instead. "Good to see Sentinel stateside," he said. Ryan froze with his drink halfway to his mouth. The Admiral added, "The Navy remembers what you did. So do I," before moving on. Ryan didn't speak to me again that whole night. His quiet dismissal had turned into a public embarrassment entirely of his own making. That should have been the end of it. Instead, he escalated, reaching out to personnel officers, asking Pentagon contacts to dig through my file, pressuring an old Academy friend to access restricted assignments. Every attempt hit the same wall: access denied. A wiser man would have stopped there. Ryan filed an Inspector General complaint, accusing me of inflating classified service, manipulating senior officers, and using a fabricated call sign to gain status at official functions. When David told me, I was standing in our kitchen at 3 a.m, listening to rain tap against the glass. I opened the lockbox my mother had left behind. Inside were 3 things: her handwritten letters, a photo of me in my Academy uniform, and a sealed envelope marked with the insignia of Naval Special Warfare Command. On the front, in her handwriting, were 9 words: "For the day someone mistakes your silence for weakness." I touched it once, then dialed the number saved in my phone under Admiral Vale. Ryan's complaint collapsed within 48 hours. The investigator didn't simply dismiss it. He warned Ryan that trying to access compartmented records through personal connections could jeopardize his own career. So Ryan shifted tactics. His engagement dinner would include senior officers, retired commanders, and family, all under the pretense of clearing the air. David didn't ask if I'd attend, only if I wanted him standing next to me. Yes. At the officers' club, Ryan waited until dessert. He rose with his glass lifted and smiled at the room. Before we celebrate, he began, "I think honesty matters, especially in a military family." He recounted the gala, the admirals, the vague classified answers, suggesting I built a persona out of other people's assumptions. He spoke for nearly 4 minutes without asking a single real question, then turned to me directly. "Give them one mission, one date, one location, one unit, unless there's nothing to give." I said nothing. He mistook my restraint for defeat. "You made my family think you were some kind of legend," he pressed. "You made my parents feel ashamed of being proud of me. You turned my own engagement into another stage for your sentinel routine." David started to rise, but I laid 2 fingers against his wrist. Ryan leaned in closer. "You're not brave. You're just protected by paperwork." The room seemed to draw inward around that sentence. His fiancée whispered his name. Charles stared at the tablecloth. A retired captain near the wall crossed his arms. I kept my hand resting on the sealed envelope. Ryan raised his glass again. "See? No answer. Because there is no answer." I glanced toward the entrance. You should have waited for the Admiral to arrive. A chair scraped. Admiral Vale stepped in, his overcoat still dark with rain from another event he'd rushed from. Walt Reyes followed 2 steps behind, in a dark suit holding a thin folder. The Admiral stopped beside me. "Commander Samantha Foster," he said. "Stand up, Sentinel." I rose. He turned to face the room. "Lieutenant Foster has demanded proof he isn't cleared to see. He won't get operational details tonight, but he'll get enough truth to understand the harm in mistaking secrecy for dishonesty." Walt set the folder on the table. The Admiral broke the seal on the Navy envelope from my mother's box. Ryan's jaw clenched. Vale pulled out a citation bearing the Secretary of the Navy's signature, sections blacked out but enough left visible. "For extraordinary leadership under hostile conditions, resulting in the recovery of 11 American personnel and the prevention of a catastrophic compromise of national assets." No one moved. The Admiral looked at me, not at Ryan. This commendation was delayed because the mission remained classified. Commander Foster turned down a public ceremony once it was approved. Ryan's voice fell to barely a whisper. "She never told you she wasn't allowed to," Walt said, and the words hit harder than any accusation could. Admiral Vale continued, "I served alongside this officer on 3 separate operations. Men are alive today because she stayed calm when nobody else could. The Navy has plenty of loud stories. Hers is one of the quiet, important ones." Ryan's hand began trembling against the tablecloth as the first truth settled over the room. The second truth was still waiting inside my mother's box. I opened it and pulled out the stack of letters. Beneath them was a notarized statement and a photograph Ryan had never seen. My mother had spent years volunteering with a support network for families of deployed special operations members. That was how she'd come to know Walt. She never learned mission details, but she understood exactly what my silence had cost. She'd written her statement 6 months before she died. Walt read a portion aloud. "My daughter doesn't talk about what she's done. Because of that, some people assume she's done very little. I have watched her come home carrying names she couldn't speak and losses she couldn't explain. Her silence isn't emptiness, it's discipline. My father had signed as a witness. That was the part I hadn't expected. Ryan stared at the page. Charles stared at his son. The Admiral folded the citation and handed it back to me. No applause came right away. The room needed a moment to absorb that the sharpest rebuke hadn't come from rank at all. It had come from a mother who was gone, who had seen everything clearly while the living settled for convenient assumptions. Walt finally turned to Ryan. "You wanted to see what the real Navy looks like," he said. "It looks like her." Someone near the back rose to their feet, then another. Within moments, the whole room was standing. Not cheering, simply standing in respect. Ryan stayed seated, glass still in hand, all his confidence drained from his face. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, not because anyone had torn him down, but because his own words had finally cornered him with nowhere left to go. I didn't smile. I returned the envelope to the box and said only one thing. "You didn't lose to me tonight. You lost to the story you needed me to fit." David and I left before coffee was served. Rain had cooled the pavement, and the night air smelled of wet pine drifting in from beyond the parking lot. We sat in the car without starting the engine, his hand finding mine across the console. What I felt wasn't victory, it was relief. For years, I believed peace would only come once other people finally understood me. Sitting there in the dark, I realized I already knew better. Peace had arrived long before that night, the day I stopped needing anyone's understanding in order to keep going. Ryan's career didn't fall apart. No dramatic punishment followed. No scandal made headlines. What happened instead was quieter. Senior officers stopped returning his calls. His old academy friend kept his distance. At family dinners, no one waited anymore for Ryan to decide whose version of events counted. He grew careful, subdued, lonelier inside rooms he once dominated. I heard most of it secondhand through David. 3 weeks later, Ryan showed up at my house alone, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at his hands. "I made you feel small because I was afraid of feeling small myself," he admitted. I waited. I filed that complaint knowing it could hurt you. I told myself it was about the truth. It was really about me. His apology wasn't a performance. No audience, no raised glass, no tidy resolution. Just, "I'm sorry." I believed him. "Respect isn't earned by talking about what you've done," I told him. "It's earned by what you do when no one's watching." He nodded. I forgave him. Though forgiveness didn't rebuild what we'd had before, it simply opened the door to something better. He started small, correcting a cousin who mocked support roles, helping David fix our fence, asking questions without turning my answers into a competition. Months later, at another Sunday dinner, Ryan raised his glass again. I braced out of old habit. He looked straight at me. "To my sister-in-law," he said, "I spent years trying to outrank someone I'd never actually taken the time to know. That's the whole truth. No legend, no call sign, no borrowed glory. Just that." That night, after everyone had gone, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my mother's letters. The paper still carried a faint trace of lavender from the drawer where she'd kept them. Most were simple. Notes about Cedar Hollow, the church bell still running slow, my father finally fixing the porch step, her hope that I was eating well. The final letter was only a page long. "Samantha, people will try to define you in whatever way is comfortable for them. Let them. A label can't shrink you unless you choose to live inside it. I knew you long before the uniform, before the silence, before the world ever asked you to carry more than it would ever thank you for. You were never hard to see. Some people simply chose not to look." I folded the letter along its worn crease and set it beside the framed scholarship certificate she'd once hidden away in my closet. For years, I thought being overlooked meant I'd failed to prove something. The Navy taught me otherwise. A lighthouse doesn't chase after ships demanding recognition. It stands exactly where it's needed. It keeps watch. It does its work through storms no one on shore will ever feel. People may misread you.